Hey guys, CryptoLazyGeek here and welcome back to the channel. So if you've been watching my channel recently, you know that I've been reviewing this little Newtonian telescope here from Apertura, and this is a great Newtonian telescope. I recommend it even for beginners. But if you also know my channel, you know that I have another Newtonian telescope with almost the same specifications that I spent tens of hours literally getting to work properly compared to 10 minutes on that other one. And I also happen to have this camera, which has an APS-C size color sensor, so an IMX571 sensor that takes great color pictures of the heavens. I also happen to have basically the same sensor from TaupeTech in my TaupeTech camera as a one-shot color sensor. I wonder where this could be going. I also happen to have yet another camera, this time with a 585 sensor in there. And yet another one from TaupeTech with the same 585 color sensor in. I also happen to have two narrowband filters. One captures H-alpha and oxygen 3, the other captures sulfur 2 and oxygen 3. I wonder where this conversation could be going. What if, in one fell swoop, I could take images of the night sky using both of those filters at the same time because I have a duplicate of everything that I need. And the only thing that is missing would be some sort of way to attach both Newtonians side by side so they can image the same target at the same time. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take this little dovetail that I got on AliExpress for less than $100. So results not guaranteed. I'm looking at far higher quality dual dovetails and also some that let me adjust the position of one of the telescopes because you need to align them together, and that's going to be really hard with this, but that might simply come later on. For now, let me show you how I'm going to attach those two scopes together, because there's a lot of steps that need to be taken. The first one is obviously attaching them on this dovetail plate. This dovetail plate is actually a Losmandy type dovetail plate, so I can use the saddle that I have on my mount already to support this, which is good, and it's also thicker and heavier, and it also is also as short as I could get it, so it could still fit the two Newtonian telescopes side by side. You want this kind of dovetail to be as short as possible, simply because then you will limit the flexure that you could have between the two telescopes. Meaning that as you slew across the sky, one telescope might start to slightly deviate from the other, and therefore your image gets murdered by that. I also made sure to tighten the bolts that I have on each of those two dovetails, or dovetail saddles, with a long arm wrench, right? So I have a lot of moment arm to really tighten them like crazy. This is because if you don't do so, with the leverage that a Newtonian can provide, these can like move easily as you slew across the sky, leading to the same issue as before. Okay, and now we need to attach the telescopes. So I have one problem to overcome already, is the dovetail for Skywatcher is horrible. I need to buy another one, but I don't currently have anything. So I have to use this as is, and on both ends you have to use bolts and screws. And actually bolts like that without any like hex screw attachment or anything like that, it's horrible. Come on, Skywatcher, you can do better than that. Which means that I can't actually, unless I remove the dovetail completely, slide them in here. Because these are cheap saddles that you cannot like put the dovetail in, you have to slide it in. So first things first, I'll slide the dovetail in, and then I will add the rings that can carry my Newtonian telescope. While I'm doing so, you notice that I have a single bolt that closes the dovetail. That's pretty bad practice, and I really need to get better dovetails. And again, I hope that I can get something from ADM Accessories or maybe from Prima Luce. Several of you guys actually sent me suggestions for something that's available, I think, on First Light Optics. All of those are very valid options, but for now, I'm going to do something horrible. It's just use this to really tighten this as much as possible. Then I can add the tube rings on top of this. Note that because I have very little space between the two tubes, I'll need to make sure that this locking mechanism is on the outside, so I have as much space as possible in between the two telescopes, because this bump takes a lot of space. This part here does not. Okay, now I have my rings and dovetail securely attached on the top. So now my next step is going to be to remove this telescope from the mount that it's currently on. And also this mount, like the AM5 or the AM3 or like a lot of strain wave gear mounts, has a home sensor, meaning it will only point in this direction, which means that if I leave it like that, and I leave my dovetail effectively like this, mounted on the mount in this direction. When the mount is at home position, I would have my scopes pointing 90 degrees. So it would be very, very weird. And so what we can do instead is I can take the saddle that's on this, remove it, and rotate it by 90 degrees. So that's what I'm going to do now. Okay, and this was a very easy task. There's just 4 bolts I needed to remove before putting the dovetail plate at a 90 degrees angle, so that now this is the home position. And so my dual scopes will be correctly pointed towards the north celestial pole when they're at the home position using the sensors that are within the mount. Also, it should be noted, this mount has a capacity without counterweights of 20 kilograms because it's a strain wave gear mount. And so it will have no difficulty whatsoever carrying my two Newtonians that together, they probably will weigh around 12 kilograms, something like that. It's also mounted on a very sturdy Japan-made tripod that I've featured on the channel before. It's an excellent tripod. I absolutely love the thing. Anyway, let's take this Losmandy style dovetail, and now I'm hesitating. Yes, so it should be this direction, and the Skywatcher Newtonian weighs more than the other Newtonian, the one from Apertura, the Carbon Star, partly because of the tube, but also because of the shoddy construction of the Skywatcher one. And so I'll actually not put the dovetail quite at the middle. I'll put it so that the Skywatcher is closer to the center, because that should actually help balance, even though balance shouldn't matter that much. It's a strain wave gear mount. One of the things that you'll notice is I'm making sure that this mount is plugged in as I'm doing this. This is because this is a strain wave gear mount. It has a brake in right ascension, but it doesn't have in declination. This means that if I didn't have power on the mount, as I'm working, the declination axis could move without me wanting to do so. To show you, I can remove the power, and now I can move the declination axis fairly easily. This is not something you should do because it actually generates power, so I do it very slowly so I don't hurt the electronics within the mount. And now, as the mount has power again, I cannot move it anymore. And next, I can simply mount my other telescope, the Carbon Star, and see how well it's going to work. So this is roughly the most I can slot it in, because even with the measures that I took, the rings start to touch each other. So for now, I'll simply lock the scope in place and tighten it with this to really be sure that everything is as stable as possible and as locked in as possible. Okay, there we go. Then I can actually adjust the positioning of the scope via the rings that hold it. And it's kind of helpful to have both openings at roughly the same level to take flats. And here we have our somewhat insane double barrel scope. So going back to the basics, what do we need to do next? So there are several things we actually need to do to make it work. We obviously need to make sure that the two tubes are aligned so they're pointing in exactly the same direction. How we're going to do that? I'm not sure. I might use shims within the telescope rings or something else. I'll have to improvise there. I could also buy something on ADM accessories. There's like an XY kind of adjuster that's made exactly for that purpose, but it costs something like $300 US. So I'll see if I can get my hands on that. And the second thing as well, something that's actually fairly important, because we're using Newtonian, we have the spider vanes that are holding the secondary mirrors on both telescopes. And that means that if they're not exactly at the same angle on the final image, this camera is diffraction artifacts like the cross that's created by the spider vanes. And that one's the angle of them will be different. And so when we stack them together, we'll have like weird effects where you could have, like, if you had them 45 degrees to one another, we'd end up with 8 diffraction spikes instead of 4. So it's an interesting thing that could happen, something to keep in mind. And of course, the main purpose of such a setup is to be able to, at the same time, image the same target. You basically gather twice the light because you have 2 cameras, 2 telescopes, etc. And one of the cameras can be using one filter, H-alpha oxygen 3, for example. And the other camera can be using another filter, sulfur 2 oxygen 3, for instance. That way, with just 2 telescopes and 2 color cameras, we're able to get the whole Hubble palette in a single night, in a single imaging session, without having to change the filters in each of the telescopes. And even if you're not doing something like narrowband, if I just put a luminance filter in both of those filter drawers that I have here, then I can simply get twice the amount of data that I would if I were using a single telescope. So that's where like everything looks, and that's where things get really interesting with this kind of setup. Now, what other difficulties are we going to have with this setup? Well, the main one will be control of the setup. So how is it going to work? Basically, I have one side of the setup, the Carbon Star from Apertura, that has the ZW ASI 2600 MC Pro Duo camera on it, meaning it has a guiding chip integrated in there. That camera doesn't have a guiding chip integrated. It doesn't make sense to have a guide scope or a guide camera on both telescopes because they are tethered to the same mount. They depend on the same mount. So that means that this telescope here will have to act as the master telescope effectively. And the guiding will be done by this camera there on behalf of the whole dual barrel telescope, because this camera will get the guide input, will tell the mount where to point and how to correct for guiding deviations, and then the whole assembly will follow. And so this telescope, we only need to be able to control basically its focuser and its main camera. That's it. We don't need to control anything else. For this telescope, we need to control the focuser, the camera, the guide camera as well, and the mount itself. So we have 2 setups there, and if you have that, you have an issue as well. Like even if you manage to have like both telescopes start a session at exactly the same time and they both take 5-minute exposures, it's almost impossible to make sure that they'll be like downloading at the same speed those images and then starting the imaging on the next image at the same time. Similarly, like if you're waiting at a red light and you're looking at your blinker compared to the other car's blinker, at first it looks like they're in sync, but then gradually they get off sync. That would be exactly the same thing happening here. So what we'd end up having is, because this telescope is the master and determines the guiding, it will also determine the dithering. So when it finishes an exposure, it would dither even if that telescope is in the middle of an exposure. So we need to synchronize the dithering of those telescopes. With control systems like the ASI Air, it's just not possible. So this kind of setup with the ASI Air, it's just out. But with software like Nina, there is a plugin for Nina that is a synchronized dither, where you can run on the same PC 2 instances of Nina. One of the instances will be connected to this camera, this focuser, and the mount, as well as the guide chip within the camera, so via PHD2. And the other one will be connected only to the focuser and the camera of that scope. And those 2 instances of Nina, they will be listening to one another. Meaning like when the master says like, hey, I want to dither, the other telescope can say like, hey, no, I'm exposing, don't dither yet, wait until I finished my exposure. And so that one would finish the exposure. They would both stop exposing. This one, the master, would do the dithering. And then once it's done the dithering, it can tell both telescopes like, hey, you're good to image now. And that's how we'll make sure that everything is kept in sync. Anyway, for now, I'm going to mount my computer on top of this rig and show you the connections I'll be using to make sure that all of the equipment is connected. Okay, so from my orange box there, the StellarMate Pro, I have 4 power outputs. So one goes to this camera, good. One goes to that camera, good. One goes to the mount, good. One goes to the PC, the black box on top there, good. So I've used all of them, but my Astroaces focuser actually requires power. The ZW focuser here doesn't. What shall we do? Well, I'm going to use a technique that I've used a long time ago. I haven't done that in a while. It is that this focuser doesn't require a lot of power. It just requires 12 volts. And I still happen to have a USB cable that transfers from the 5 volts that USB provides, or 3.7 volts, depending on how you look at it, and then transfer that to 12 volt with very little power effectively, but it's still enough for this focuser. And I'm just going to use one of the USB ports on the StellarMate Pro and power my focuser like that. And so now I have all of the power that I require. What about USB? Well, both this focuser and that focuser will be connected to USB via the hub that is on the cameras attached to each of the respective scopes. So there's no problem there. This camera will need to be controlled via USB 3 on my black desktop computer here, and that camera will also require to be connected via USB 3 there. Then we have the mount that also needs to be connected. It can be connected via USB 2, and I think that's pretty much it. We don't need any other USB cable, so we're fine with just 3 USB plugs to control this, which I think is awesome. And now we have this equipment with all of the connections made. We are effectively ready to go. How insane does this look? Very insane? Yes, absolutely. If you want to tell me how insane I am, I really want you to go down in the comments and let me know your thoughts on this, what you would be doing instead, etc. While you're at it, please like the video. It really helps the channel out. And if you want to support the channel even more and you're planning on buying anything from Agena, High Point Scientific, Amazon, etc., if you do so after clicking the links that I have in the description, it helps the channel out at no cost to you. And if you want to help even more directly, you can join my Patreon as a member, link in the description, or join my channel as a member. You guys truly make the channel possible, so thank you so much. Okay, so what are the next steps with this? Well, the next step will be the software configuration and then using this under the stars to see like how things are looking, right? Okay, but now that we've set up this thing from a hardware point of view, and not completely, mind you, we haven't aligned the telescopes together. I'll need a clear sky to do that. And we haven't aligned the Newtonian spikes together either. And we'll need a clear night for that too. But we can go to the software side of things now. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll be using Nina with the synchronized dithering plugin that is available for it. So what have I done? I'm currently on my PC and I'm just going to run Nina. Here we go. And what I've done is I've created 2 profiles. You can see I have the Carbon Star profile for my Apertura telescope that just works out of the box. And we have the Quattro profile for the scope that I spent hours on to make work properly. So for now, I'll start with the Carbon Star. And you can see that I have a camera filter wheel, which is just a virtual manual filter wheel for me to keep track of which filters we're using and to also synchronize flap frames to their light frames. And I also have the focuser connected and the mount corrected. So I can load the profile. Okay, and this profile will be the master profile. It has my usual Nina colors, which I like. And so I'd normally just be connecting the camera, connecting the manual filter wheel, connecting the focuser, connecting the mount, and then guiding, right? So this will do everything. Now, one of the things that is very interesting to look at is this thing, Sync Service Idle. This is going to be the synchronized dithering service. And you can see that if I go to plugins, there it is. This is the synchronization plugin that I'll be using. And so you need to search for and install this plugin in order to be doing the synchronized dithering and guiding effectively for dual scope setups. And you can see the instructions are basically here, but the gist of it is you want to run first the instance that will be the master instance. So that's my Carbon Star. And then you want to run a second instance of Nina that will be dedicated to the secondary telescope, the one that's not going to be used for guiding. And in your sequences, instead of using just dither, you'll be using synchronized dither. So you can see here I have my standard sequence template, and I have a dither options here, right? So dither after a number of exposures. Instead, I need to use this trigger here, synchronized dither instead. And it's the same options, but now it's going to try to synchronize itself with another instance. You can see that if you go back to plugins as well, there is a setting that's available as part of the plugin, which is the maximum waiting time that this plugin will to wait for the other telescope to finish its exposure, for instance. Otherwise, it will just keep going. This is to avoid some kind of deadlock where you just stop imaging because you keep waiting for a scope that's never going to answer. And by the way, creating a profile is very easy. You simply do changes on your profile, connect a different camera, change the focal length of your telescope, that kind of stuff, change the settings. And then you put in a new name in here. and you click on plus, and this will add your profile. Okay, so we have the master setup that is currently connected. Let's open up a second instance of Nina. And this time I will choose the secondary telescope, which is my Quattro 150p. So I am going to load this. And you can see I intentionally set up a different color scheme. So I remember which is the primary instance, which is the secondary instance. And I have my camera that I can connect to. I can connect to my manual filter wheel, which is pretty much the same. And I can also connect, I forgot to set it up actually, to my ZWO focuser. And here we are, and that's it. I do not connect anything else because this is the secondary telescope. This is the secondary instance. It should not be controlling the mount. It should not be connected to the mount. It should just image without caring about where we are pointed to. I will still want to organize my frames decently. So I will still make sure that I have the target name in my sequence so that we can have everything under one folder. And actually, under options imaging, I've set things up so that I have, as part of the folder structure, the Quattro will save its images in its own folder. And going back to the Carbon Star instance, to the master instance, you can see it will also save things in its own folder. That way we can keep things nice and arranged. And that is basically the gist of it, the gist of the software connectivity. Of course, we'll need to test that under the stars. I don't have stars available for a while, so we'll need to wait for that. For now, we've seen the physical setup of the telescope with the double barrel. It's completely crazy. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments while you're there, like the video. Subscribe to the channel, in which case, welcome, etc, etc. Thank you so much to my Patreon supporters and channel members for making this channel possible. But yeah, lots of stuff left remaining. I'll be really wanting to read the comments, see what you think about this crazy setup. But more important than all of that, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget whenever you can to look up at the stars, or the clouds in my case. Maybe don't make your own dual barrel setup because it's crazy complex. And I'll see you next time.